Well, hello, everybody. Welcome once again to the Van Buren Variety Show. As always, glad you're here. Those of you that are watching this live, and even those that are watching this days, weeks, and months after the fact, no matter when you're watching it, we're glad you're here. I am Bob Van Buren, your host, and as always, glad you're here. And for those of you that are just tuning in for the first time, don't know what the show's about, Variety tells you everything you need to know. Every week I have an interesting guest on talking about an equally interesting topic. It might be a person's profession, it might be their hobby, it might be a how-to segment, they might even play some instruments for you. So in order to stay tuned to what's going on here, make sure you hit that subscribe button. It doesn't take just a second to push subscribe, and that way you'll get alerts on upcoming events and even a spin-off that I keep talking about, that I'm in the works now, a spin-off of this show, but on the same channel. And also, if you like tonight's episode, don't just watch it. Hit that like button, because I'm sure our author would love to see and hear all the people that has viewed this video and looked at his books that we're going to be talking about tonight. Hope you've all had a great week so far. I have. I'll tell you this. I've discovered a new, I don't want to use the word hobby, because this may not be a hobby. This might be a one-off thing, but last 2 days ago, I took a community education art class. I've never painted, I've never done anything like that in my life, but I thought, you know what, let me just try and see how I like it. So I scanned the painting that I did 2 nights ago, and I hope you're a little kind. Now remember, this is my first painting, okay? So to me it's a little rough, but I did my best. So here is Bob Van Buren's first painting of his entire life. I did my best, so I try to do it, an Australian scene. So I know. So the instructor that we had gave a very good lesson about how to mix paints and how to put the right color on the right thing, and kind of just use your own imagination. She did the painting herself in front of us, but as you can imagine, everybody's painting turned out a little bit different. So this was my vision of an Australian sunset, so I'm proud of it. So it's not bad for a beginner. At least I don't think it is. So I don't think it would fetch much on eBay, but hey, it's mine. So kind of like painting. I might take another class, eventually someday. So there's a Bob Van Buren original right there. So, okay, well, enough about me. But I want to talk about another kind of craft. And it's a craft that I'm not very good at, but I have somebody here that is, and it's writing. And not only is this person a very, very great writer, he is actually a world traveler. And I mean that in every sense of the word. And we'll talk about that here. So without further ado, let me bring my guest on this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to Humphrey Hawksley, author and a BBC correspondent, which is part of the reason he's such a globetrotter. So, man, he puts my map to shame, and we'll talk about that now. So, Humphrey, welcome to the Van Buren Variety Show.
I love your picture. I think it's fantastic. How long did it take you to paint?
We were in class about a little over 2.5 hours.
Oh, you did that in 2.5 hours. It's brilliant.
But the teacher now, she helped us. She knew we were all novices. And so she gave us each one an individual palette. So she already had the necessary paints that we needed already on the palette. So it was already kind of but she did tell us how to, dab a little bit of this color, to dab a little bit of this color, mix it together really good to get this color.
But the way you did the sky and blended those colors together.
Yeah.
I mean, that really is a work of art.
Yeah. So
there you go. Jackson Pollock.
Not bad for a first painting, I guess. Now, let me just ask you, I talked to my audience. Everybody heard you're a world traveler. Have you actually been to Australia?
I used to live in Australia.
Oh, wow.
When I left school, age 17, I got a job on a merchant cargo ship that was taking iron ore, and it dropped me off in northern Australia. We went to Japan and Africa on the way, and it dropped me off way north of Brisbane, for any of your people that roughly know Australia.
Yeah.
And I stayed there for 2 or 3 years, actually. just sort of working, backpacking around, working, picking fruit, digging trenches, working on sheep farms. That's how I know that kangaroo was looking all right. So I've seen those scenes, Bob, that you painted. I've sort of seen them as a young man. And I've been back many times since.
So you literally were in the land down under.
Yeah. In fact, since it's 1 o'clock in the morning here, I know you're a little earlier. My voice might drop into a lazy Australian accent somewhere along the lines that I picked up when I was young.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, let me just tell you, I'm very grateful for Humphrey being on tonight, because while it is, depending on where you are in the United States, at the time of this recording, it was 7 o'clock Central Time, 8 o'clock Eastern Time, or New York time. He is in Great Britain right now, where it is 1 o'clock in the morning, did you say?
1 o'clock in the morning, yep.
So,
yes.
Wow, that's dedication. So thank you so much, Humphrey. I know we're robbing you of your sleep, but we appreciate you being here.
As soon as I saw your hat, your name, and your flag, I knew I had to do the show. It's brilliant.
Thank you. Well, Humphrey, we're going to talk about your books, obviously. And ladies and gentlemen, he's got several that I know you're going to find intriguing. But I'd like to kind of go back a little bit. You were a correspondent for the British Broadcasting Company, or BBC.
Yeah.
So kind of tell us about how you got into that, and maybe some of your experiences as a BBC correspondent.
I got into it, I think it was during my travels. Mm-hmm. And I was traveling around, and we were in the sort of 1970s, and there was and I actually managed to hitchhike up to the northern Australian town of Darwin, the only town the Japanese bombed in the war.
Yes.
And I was planning to go back to Britain through Asia and everything in the time. And on Christmas Eve in 1974, I think it was, there was a cyclone called Cyclone Tracy. And we were told about it and everything, but it was Christmas Eve. We were out, we were in the pubs, and we were getting drunk, wandering around. And then suddenly, whew, this cyclone hit.
Oh, no.
Typhoon. The town was flattened.
Oh, no.
They have, what they do is, and I think you have sort of towns like this in the States, where you have sort of concrete pillars and the cargo's underneath and the house is sort of on top.
Yes.
And that's the sort of tropical air thing, flooding and all the rest of it. Anyway, the whole town, which was on that, all of those top things were gone. And the only thing that was left were the concrete pillars. And we spent the evening, we sobered up pretty quickly. Myself and a few friends spent the evening getting in people who were drunk, because there's stuff flying around, and they were getting hit and cut up by it and everything like that.
Oh, no.
And I stayed behind afterwards. They did an evacuation, but they were paying a lot of money for people to stay behind and put roofs back on and everything. I stayed behind. And the journalists flew in. And we all got interviewed. And I thought, oh, this is quite a nice job to have. There's a colorful thing happens. You go in, you talk to interesting people. You go on TV, radio, or the newspapers, you get a little famous, and then you go back home, and then something else happens, and you go to it. I said, I think that's what I want to do for a living. I was sort of 18 or 19 at the time. So I did, eventually, I left and went back to the UK, and then I became a journalist. And it took a bit of time, for any job, but eventually I traveled around a bit. I got jobs back in Australia. I worked in Hong Kong, and then I got back and joined the BBC and in the newsroom.
And that took you to a lot of the travels around the world here.
That took us, like Bob, in any job with a big institution, you have to do your years in the mast. So I sat in the newsroom for 2 or 3 years, and I just had itchy feet, and I got to know all the people, which, I always tell the young people, do that, don't go back to head office. You might hate it, but just sit there and get to know everybody, because they'll be running the place 10 years from now. And then I got my first job. I was the correspondent in Sri Lanka. There was a civil war going on there, or just starting there, between the Tamils, who were in the minority, and the Sinhalese. They're Buddhists, and the Tamils are Hindus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that was all beginning there. And I went out to cover it. And that was my first war and my first foreign posting.
Ooh. And you got expelled from there, didn't you? So tell us how that happened. I read that from your bio. So you got expelled from Sri Lanka. What, were you getting too close to the truth? Is that what they didn't like?
Yeah, they didn't like I mean, what was happening is that the government that was run by the Sinhalese Buddhist majority, really, and it was a government, they felt threatened by the Tamil minority because the Tamils were sort of better organized or whatever. The British had been in their divide and rule thing. And at that particular stage there, the government troops were just going into villages and massacring people. I mean, you know, they would just go into a place and kill everybody there. And then I'd go and report on it. And they didn't like that. And there was a town right at the top called Jaffna. And that was basically held by the rebels. They held that place. And I was allowed to go up there. You know, there were divisions within the government, and some people wanted me out of the country, some people wanted me, and I went up there, and it was an incredible scene because they were running the town, but the government troops were in pockets. So they held the airport, and they held a fort in the middle of the town, basically besieged in the fort.
Oh, wow.
But the fort, the people in the fort would shell the hotel I was staying at. So the guy says to me, I come in, the guy says, the proprietor, so they keep running the hotel. All these war zones, they try to keep running the hotel. So the guy in the bow tie is serving the lobster thermidor or whatever.
Business as usual, right?
yeah, it's a sort of, in Sarajevo in Bosnia, they do that. In Basra, Sheraton, they do that. These great hotel chains, they do that. And in this one, he said, do you want, Mr. Hawksley, do you want to have the room with the view over the lagoon and the fort is air conditioned? Or non-air conditioned is the view over the woods or something? And I said, I want the air conditioned one, of course. So I went to the air conditioned one, went out the next day. During the day, they shelled my room directly from the fort.
You can't win.
Okay. I think I'll take the heat. I mean, you're in Texas, Bob. You know about heat and air conditioning.
Yeah, we know about the heat down here. Yeah.
and that taught me. You know, these are the choices that you have in a war zone or whatever you want to call it. You know,
working in the field, yeah.
Or do you want to feel a little safer?
Exactly. And then you got so many details on your BBC, but Serbia was an issue too, wasn't it?
I mean, that was interesting because if you this was during the Kosovo War.
Yes,
they have so many Balkan wars, I forget one or the other. And we were in Montenegro, which was strange because it had the Yugoslav or the Serbian army in there, but Montenegro was basically pro-Western. So this was when NATO was bombing Serbia because it was about to carry out some more massacres of Albanians. So NATO bombed it, was going in and bombing it, and we were based in Montenegro. And I thought, well, let's go to this town, and I think it was a sort of Serbian town. We had a driver and a translation cameraman, and just imagine, you know, if you wanted to say Dallas and Houston, right? I guess there's a freeway between Dallas and Houston.
Sure,
I know
interstate, yeah.
I've been there, right? Okay, but also but that freeway goes through a county that is occupied by another force. So you actually really have to go take other roads to go around it. And we were chatting away in the car and we forgot that. So our driver went straight on the road that she would usually go to there, and we got picked up on a roadblock there and taken to a local police station. And the thing to do in that situation, I mean, there was me and the cameraman who's an Australian, I was British. And then there were the two, you know, really sort of vivacious young women who were with us. The driver was called, I remember she was called Snow White. She had a sort of blonde hair.
Snow White.
Snow White, she was called. Or we called her Snow White. And so we just let them do the work. So they would come into us and say, we know you're spies. We're going to take you to Belgrade and put you on trial for spying, for which the, you know, the death penalty or whatever it was. So that was going on in one sort of thing, and then these two women were flirting and chatting up and bribing and God knows what, and I just sat there reading a book, and you just sat there and you say absolutely nothing.
I mean, keep your mouth shut.
Mouth shut, absolutely nothing, looking bored, and make sure that they're not, you know, that they think they're not triggering any fear in you. And then about 5-6 hours later, they said, "Oh, off you go." You know,
That was it. Just go, get out of our sight.
yeah, and they could have put us in a truck and driven us to Belgrade and put us in a jail. You know, you just don't know. These things can turn on a dime.
Wow.
Yeah.
You've seen. I bet you could just write a whole series of books on your adventures in BBC, or just alone, couldn't you? You should write an autobiography, really.
Yeah, well, you can do a bit of that, but no, I always like to look ahead. So, sit down and write. Well, I might when I'm 80 or 90 or something.
Right, sure.
I'll dictate it.
Well, now that was very interesting. You've got so many interesting stories, but you are also a very successful writer. And you have got multiple books, and that's putting it lightly, multiple books. And every one of them, I've seen the titles just only and read a little bit of the synopsis. It sound very interesting. So I'll just kind of get into your writing career. What got you interested in writing, or when did you develop, or that passion, should I say?
Well, I think it was when I was a kid and reading the books that were out then. I do remember reading Leon Uris's Exodus, which was a fictional account, or a factional account, I guess, of the creation of Israel after the Holocaust.
Yes.
And I would remember sort of reading it. It took a few days, and I was walking down the street reading it. I was under the bedclothes with the torch reading it, and I kept thinking, this is interesting. This is a fictional book because they had characters, but they were real characters, that they existed. And this is something that I know nothing about. I mean, we weren't taught it at school. And that put me into going into these authors that would tell you about places that you couldn't get, or my brain didn't work in the way that I would read a sort of non-fiction book with footnotes and God knows what, and be. So I was reading. I don't know if you remember Alex Haley Airport and James Michener Alaska, and
I do.
Poland, and all of those people. The guy called Robert Ruark wrote about Africa, and I just couldn't get my nose out of these books. And I said, "This is what I want to do." But of course, when you're just starting out, that doesn't pay the bills unless you hit the jackpot and you're a genius, which I do neither, so I don't gamble and I don't drink.
I'm not a gambler either. I always say I've got the winning numbers, they just don't call them.
Yeah, I mean, I've got some. We have things over here called premium bonds, where you can win £1 million, but my number never comes up. I just sit on them, and but a lot of people are a lot of people go into journalism. To write books. And I was, in the mid-90s, I was the BBC Beijing bureau chief in China.
Oh, wow.
And it was a fascinating story because this was when China was beginning to build the skyscrapers and the high-speed rails, and people were just beginning to feel that there's a little bit of life after communism, although it still was communism. And they could put down a mortgage on a house, they could send their kids to school, all of that sort of thing. And then you had the human rights violations and people in prison. So you had these two parallel stories going on. So I thought, well, I'm mid-career journalist. I guess I should get a book under my belt. So I wrote this sort of outline for a non-fiction book about, with a China, and then a double thing, and then, some long explanation. And I sent it to an agent, and we met in London, and the agent said, "I've got a publisher I want you to go and see." So we went into this publisher's office, and for me, this was very exciting. I mean, it never, it's a huge office, leather desk, and prizes on the wall and everything. The guy was a legend in the publishing world, and he sat down, he looks at it like this, and he says, "Yes," and he sort of goes like that, and he slides to the side of his desk, and then there's a flutter of breeze in the window, and it falls into the trash can. And I think, what the hell am I doing at this meeting for?
Yeah, really? Oh man.
Yeah. And I turned, look at my agent, who's sort of looking ahead. He's not giving anything away. And then the publisher leans forward. He says, "Humphrey, I could publish that book. It's very worthy. We might sell 1,000 copies." And I say, "Yeah." He says, "But tell me this," he says, "could you write me a book about a war between China and America?" And I think, nothing. A journalist likes nothing more than an editor who knows what he wants.
Exactly.
So I said, sure.
A what if, basically, you know?
Yeah. And he wanted it very quickly because the handover of Hong Kong to China was about to happen,
Yeah.
and there was stuff coming up. And so I got a co-writer in who was working for the Financial Times. I was the BBC. And I wrote a book called Dragon Strike. And it was called Dragon Strike, The Millennium War. There it is.
Right there, ladies and gentlemen.
Yep. And that book with that cover is still selling today. It's incredible.
Still
Every
selling.
time there's a bit of a peak on this Taiwan thing, or because
Yeah.
China's now becoming, enemy number one, isn't it? So,
Yes.
and this was 25 years ago, and we've got in it, and they call it a future history. So we looked a little bit ahead, and it's interesting because the machinery has changed, the equipment's changed, and all the rest of it, but the thinking hasn't changed.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a great success.
That's
And
great.
then they commissioned me to do two more similar like that. So I did one called Dragon Strike, which was Dragon Fire. That's the 1 o'clock in the morning talking there.
And that's the sequel. That's the sequel.
It's sort of sequel, sort of standalone, and that's a war between China, India, and Pakistan.
They're allies, or they're fighting each other?
No, they're fighting. Well, China and Pakistan are allies.
They're allies. Okay.
India is not the ally.
Standalone.
And they were both. It's
Wow.
interesting. I had them both as nuclear powers when they weren't then nuclear powers, but they were. They are now.
Oh, they definitely are now. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and the then Indian Defense Minister, a guy called George Fernandez.
Mm-hmm.
We sent him a early copy, and he wrote something about it, saying, everybody has to read this book because it tells us the consequences of not sorting things out before it gets too late. Because at the end of the book, I have, it's not a spoiler because I think it's been out there. I have Bombay or Mumbai being
Annihilated.
Nuclear strike, and the rest of it, and all the things that go into it, and that these are crazy things in the publishing industry. Dragon Fire for about a month was outselling Harry Potter in India.
Oh wow! That's awesome. Congratulations. That's saying
Dragon
something
Strike
right
number one,
there.
Harry
Wow.
Potter was number two. I've still got somewhere in the Times of India.
That's impressive. Yeah, that's great.
Charts. Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Did when you wrote that book? I mean, did you when you first when you first started writing Dragon Strike, did you perceive it to be a sequel, or did you perceive it to be a standalone, or did it just kind of build as you went along? Hey, there might be a need of follow up to this.
I wrote we wrote Dragon Strike very quickly, and we did finish it with a bit of a cliffhanger. But it wasn't the cliffhanger that it went to. We finished it with something to do with China and Japan, which I haven't written that one apart from the thriller that I've just done. But but no, I think the publisher came back and sort of said, well, Dragon Strike sold quite well in India. Why don't you do one based on India, and it'll sell well here?
Yeah, sure.
But then you open up that Indian market or the Asian market for it as well.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's great. So is it just those two books, or was it another sequel?
There was another one called The Third World War.
That one here. Wow, that's even terrifying. That's
yeah,
the title alone is terrifying, especially even today's time.
Well, I mean, what's everybody talking about now? And this was one, and this one I wrote after the Iraq War had begun. So I sort of took time out to cover that. So I was covering that. And during that thing, in my time in China and the type of rhetoric that was coming out from George W. Bush and Rumsfeld and the people of that time that, those of you of a certain age that are listening to this will remember those characters. Dick Cheney and people, that sort of thinking. And then I knew how the Chinese thought about things, and I'd done some stuff in Russia, and India was there. And I was thinking, well, you've got a bunch of characters here that act as they have acted for centuries. And they push themselves into corners that they can't get out of. And that's how these wars begin. So I took a couple of things that happened here. It wasn't, there was, I think, a big terror strike in India, and then China did something and Russia did. A little bit like what's unfolding now.
Right now,
where you've got, China backing Russia, but it's not really, and Russia's doing what it's doing, and China's doing what it's doing, and how on earth do you move away from that? And in Third World War, it went like this. And
I think what you're seeing is as a good example, and we've heard this more and more in the history of the world. There seems to be a lack of diplomacy. It's like shoot first, investigate later.
Yeah. And there's I call it generational collective amnesia. So, if we look at, if you look back at, say, Iraq, where you have a dictator, they've never had democracy, you have a dictator, and he's gone. What do you expect to happen there?
Right.
And then there were the professors, I think, from the Chicago Business School or something, that thought that you could go in there and you could sack everybody from the waterworks, computerize it, and the free market.
Modernize it,
But everybody you sacked went to join the insurgency because they had nothing to do.
Yeah.
So, it's not a right or wrong thing.
You got to weigh the options almost.
It's the what is going to work thing.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I remember driving up into one of the trips there shortly, just a few days after Baghdad had fallen. We came up from Kuwait, and you must, when you have a dictatorship, you have these big signs of the leader on billboards and places like that. So we drove all the way up, and every picture of Saddam Hussein had been either ripped apart or scrawled upon or anything like that. So imagine you get up every morning and you see this figure. You might not like him, but you know where you stand with him. And then suddenly he's gone. So it was, and there was, I think it was that trip or one afterwards. I was doing a house. We were talking about the Iraqi army, so we got a bunch of generals, former generals, and young people in the house. We're just interviewing them generally,
Sure.
And at that moment, the U.S. announced that it was going to disband the Iraqi army. We were in there, so there was a sort of general and a mustachioed older pilot and a young tank commander who was about 30 and somebody else. And their first question wasn't, how could they do that? They said, what about our pensions? What about the house? And it was all about that. And then the young guy, the tank commander, got up and somebody said, where are you going? He said, I'm off to join the insurgency. I'm not going to stand for this.
Oh, see, defeats the purpose,
Off he went, yeah, off he went. So, and that's the Third World War came out of that thinking, because you had, you have a bad guy. Saddam's a bad guy. Nobody disputes that. But you've got to be a little clever about how you're going to do these transitions. Otherwise, you get war.
Kind of reminds me of what you're talking about Iraq is kind of what's going on in North Korea right now. Because you go over there, and I've seen videos, online, and everywhere you look, it's pictures of Kim Jong-il everywhere.
Yeah.
And, and I feel sorry for the people, because a lot of them are suffering. But how would you all of a sudden, bring democracy overnight to those people? It would be shell-shocked, know?
No, you're absolutely right. I've been there a couple of times.
North Korea?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Was that scary for you?
Well, once was undercover, and once I led in an official BBC delegation. It was, these dictatorships, they go through their ups and downs. So
sure.
So And you're absolutely right. And they, you can't. That is going to be like a 50 to 100 year project, and it's got to be done. And one of the key things is that what I just, the story I just told about the Iraqi thing, is that the elites that run North Korea are going to worry about their status and their money and their pensions and their houses and their children. Yeah, you can't just suddenly say, "Oh, sorry, you're not the governor of this province anymore. You've got to hold an election." He's going to get out his guns, isn't he?
Insurgency again. See.
Yeah.
So, but Humphrey, would you say your books, and we're going to go through some more of them, are all of them? Would you say, or most all of them, based on things you've observed in real world history? Would you say?
The ones that we've just gone through, yes, and then I've done a couple of non-fiction ones, which are really sort of primers and accounts of that. And then the thriller series that I'm working on at the moment, I try to embed it in a piece of reality, and then from that reality, I make stuff up because it's fiction. You got
to dramatize it for sure.
So the it's called the Reiko Zena series, and the first one there was Man on Ice, which is this one, which is that one, and that came out of a BBC reporting assignment that I did. I think it was 2015. It was just after the Russia took Crimea in Ukraine, and I thought, okay, so there's a lot of US Ukraine stuff here, and Europe's in the middle, as it always is. But actually, Russia and the United States have a border. And why don't I see where that border is? Because I knew nothing about it. So I opened, I have an old Times Atlas that I sort of use. I opened it like that, and I saw, and I can see it on the map behind you, Bob. There, you've got Alaska
where
there.
The Aleutian Islands are right here.
The Aleutians go down there, and you've got the Bering Strait there,
right here.
there, in that tip of that. Yeah. And that Bering Strait is about 50 miles across, mainland to mainland. But
I didn't know that.
In the middle of that 50 miles are two islands. One is called Little Diomede, and one is called Big Diomede. The border runs between them. Little Diomede is a indigenous Alaskan island with 80 people living on it.
I didn't know that. Oh, wow.
Big Diomede is a bigger island by its name, and it's a Russian military base.
Wow.
So you get up, and I went out to Little Diomede, and I stayed with the islanders there for 10 days.
Wow.
And you get up every morning, and you open the curtains, you're looking out on Russia.
You can actually see it from where you're standing. Wow.
Sarah Palin, for those of you of our age would remember Sarah Palin's vice presidential campaign, and she said Americans can see Russia from their backyards, and she was saying absolutely 100% the truth.
Wow! Oh, wow!
Yeah,
I like to talk to our audience about this book. Ladies and gentlemen, if you can't see that at the top, right where it says "Man on Ice," it says, "In a frozen land, one man stands between the world and war." Now that is intriguing in itself. So, kind of tantalize us here, Humphrey. I know you kind of about Russia and America, but can you kind of give us some little breadcrumbs there?
So I set this this book on. I think it begins around January the 16th in an indeterminate year.
Okay.
On the eve of a presidential transition. Because the presidential transition starts on January the 20th, on January the 20th.
That's true.
And you have two presidents who don't exactly see eye to eye, and occasionally that happens.
Imagine that, yeah. And prime ministers too.
Yeah, and we have it more than you guys do.
Yeah.
And so you have when that happens, you have a bit of a vacuum in defense and security in that because, and particularly that, 20th, 21st is that. So Russia decides to go in and take an island, and this island of Little Diomede. I name the island, and round up the villagers on the island, and what they claim or what they say is they're doing medical checks on them because they hear that they're not very healthy there, and the Americans aren't looking after them properly, and that sort of stuff. The sort of thing Putin's saying about going into Ukraine. And they're being full of neo-Nazis and they're leading a dreadful life.
Propaganda.
And the question is, okay, so what is America going to do? And when I said I like to embed all my things, in fact, I lived on that island for 10 days. We couldn't get off because of fog.
Wow.
Russia could be across there in 3 minutes.
Very, very quickly. Yeah.
And there is no government presence whatsoever. There's no state troopers. There's no border control. There's no police even. There's nothing. There's no military. There's no Alaska National Guard. They took down the Alaska National Guard post during the thaw, the 90s.
Yeah. When pretty much an open island then, basically.
It's absolutely, and this island is basically a sort of, a hill or a little mountain with the houses around one side of it, and it's got no roads, no vehicles, no hotels, no restaurants, nothing. It's just got these incredible people, and and when I thought about writing the book, this character Reiko Zena, who now goes through all these books, I started, in a thriller, you're going to get a James Bond type character or a Jack Ryan or a special forces guy. And I said, who should I get for this? And I thought, well, hold on a second, Dumbo. I thought, the people that can handle this the best are the people that are here, because they are as tough as you come. They're hard as nails.
Sure.
And a lot of them have served in Iraq. They joined the Alaska National Guard, and they, to get off the island, they do that. Mm-hmm. So my hero is a composite of one of those guys. Yeah.
That's intriguing.
Yeah.
Now, is that a book standalone, or do you have sequels to this one as well? Is it part of a series?
It was written as a standalone, and it did well, and the publisher wanted others. So we have three sequels to it now. We have Man on Edge, which I think you didn't have, but Man on Edge is set. That same guy goes to the Norway-Russian border, and I went up there dog sledding, actually, because we have a dog sled.
Oh, I bet that was fun.
So dog sledding across the border there.
That is absolutely great.
And that was very interesting up there because maybe I'm too nerdy on history and politics and that, but that patch of the border there where Norway borders Russia up on that coastline there.
Yeah, above Sweden, above Finland.
Yeah, above Sweden. It's called Finnmark. It's the only land that Stalin ever occupied and withdrew from voluntarily. So the Russians and the Norwegians actually up there get on really well together. So I set a whole thing up there.
That's great. I love hearing this.
And then we did there was Man on Edge, and then Man on Fire. Was this one, and this one I began back on the Bering Strait, which was this boat here, which the artist put on the cover. They were trying to get an agent across from Russia to the US with some secret information, and that agent gets killed. So there's a fight. It begins with a firefight in the Bering Strait.
Kind of like a Mission Impossible type situation.
Yeah, Mission Impossible type thing there, and then Reiko Zena happens to be there on holiday with his fiance, and his fiance is very European, so there's a bit of love tangle sort of stuff going on there. Yeah, all of that. Cool. And her name's Carrie, and then they have to find out what this information was, and that's a chase to find that out, and it's actually quite a sort of devastating. It's a space weapon that can freeze, that can sort of actually cuts out our computers, cuts out our microphones, cuts out everything, and the sort of political twist I put in this. Hopefully there are lots of other twists through it, but the political twist is that if you really want to destroy a society, you've got to turn the people against their government. So if you're sitting there in Texas or wherever you are, and if someone comes and bombs your village and kills all your people there, then you hate the person that did the bombing. But if your lights don't work, and your laptops don't work, and your traffic lights don't work, and your hospitals break down, then you turn against the government that was meant to supply all those things for you.
Anarchy, basically.
Yeah. And you're always, what do they say? For everybody's 4 meals away from anarchy.
And that is a true statement.
Yeah. What happened there, Bob, in Texas? Was it a year or so ago that the grid almost collapsed in the cold weather?
Oh, it did. This was in February of 21, and I mean, we had temperatures. It's probably not going to be sound as cold to you like you are in England, but it was like 0 degrees here, and our power would go out sporadically. And I mean, the temperature inside our homes just dropped. I mean, I was all wrapped up in blankets, and it would just come on for a few hours and then stop. And of course, on top of that, we were iced in, we were snowed in, so nobody could go to the store and pick up milk or necessities. And so you were just stuck at home. And when the power went out, it was just one time. If it's 0 degrees outside and your power's off for 8 hours. That temperature is going to drop very, very quickly, and it was horrible. Of course, after the fact and after everything kind of got back to quote normal, that's when searching for the guilty happened. I mean, that's when the finger pointing happened, and that's when the mob said, "We want to know who's responsible for this." So
and who did your the people blame? Was it the power companies or the government or Russia?
No, I think it was the power company. It's one. I don't think everybody blamed it, but the most of the wrath and searching for the guilty came to the power company. Of course, they smoothed it over and said we'll fix it and blah 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 blah. But now so far, knock on wood, nothing's happened. But I forgot about that last year. When you've got people just snowed in, they can't go to work, they can't even get milk or bread or and the food's coming down, and then now your power's out and you're cold and true story.
You look for and I think I was writing Man on Fire when that happened, so I thought, this is interesting. You've actually got it happening somewhere
as we speak,
in the States as we speak.
What's your latest book?
The latest is Ice Islands, which is the same character, Reiko Zenna, and this time
part of the series.
This is a series.
Okay, all right.
It's a series. I'm waiting for Steven Spielberg to call, and
come on, Steven, call him. George Lucas, you too. Go ahead.
This was an interesting one. For me, it was interesting. In 2011, Barack Obama signed a presidential executive order about organized crime that was a threat to the United States democracy. And I thought, okay, this is interesting. And they had the usual suspects. They had the Italian mafia, some Russian gangs, and the narcos down in Latin America. But they also had the Japanese Yakuza in there. And I thought, well, hold on a second. I thought Japan was fairly, controlled, and that the Yakuza were there, but they wouldn't mess around with America.
Yeah.
And I met an FBI contact at some conference, and I said, is there any truth in this? And she said, I'll fix you up with someone to do it. And it wasn't like a call like this. You had to press codes and do this. And anyway, I ended up talking to an FBI agent who was the head of East Asia, whatever, keeping the homeland safe. And I said, Agent John Doe, I said, I just want to run an idea by you. Supposing you had an organized crime operation in Japan that got too close to the Japanese government and was turning the Japanese government against America and was doing that. And he said, Humphrey, let me stop you there. He said, for 20 years of my career, I've been trying to get that on leaders' desks. So they take.
Wow.
I
Ooh.
thought, well, and he said he didn't give me any classified information, but he pointed me to court cases and people that were involved in court cases in the US, some in Asia, some in the UK, a lot on the West Coast. And I looked through that, and I couldn't get him off the phone. We were talking for 90 minutes, and like I said earlier, Bob, I like to have a sort of a ballast of truth, and that gave it to me, and I thought, right, I can run with this.
This is it.
so Reiko Zena is trying to get. There's a daughter of the big crime family that's very close to the government and he's got to find a Turner, put her inside the family and stop what they're trying to do, and it's a chase. Wow. It's a bit of a love story because we don't know if they'll and there's that underlying political thing, and there's a lot of human interest chasing around and ice islands, what do you call it, and it starts in the Baltic. But there's some islands between Finland and Sweden that they were about to go to war over them because they're predominantly Swedes live there, but it's Finnish territory, one of those situations. And but the Brits brokered a peace, and so they're not at war. And now they have a peace institute there, and so I started at that peace institute where they teach people not to have conflict.
Sure.
And it ends up in Hokkaido in northern Japan. I mean, something that I didn't really know, I should have known it, or I wasn't aware of it, is that Japan and Russia are still technically at war.
Over the Kuril Islands, and
the Kuril Islands, yeah, or the Northern Territories, as the Japanese call it, and they haven't signed. It's about a bit like North Korea. They've signed a ceasefire from the Pacific War, but they haven't got a peace treaty.
No peace treaty. Yeah, that is very interesting.
Yeah, I didn't know it. I find that an interesting little sort of twist.
Well, you'll find I'm a history buff too. I really love history, and I like your books because they sound like they're action packed, and I love action books, and I also like the subject matter. And the reason I say that, Humphrey, we talked a little bit before the show. I like movies or books like you've written because it reminds me of the 1980s film Red Dawn. It was a what if Russia invaded America, and most recently a very scary miniseries came out called Man in the High Castle, which has dealt with more alternate history. And so I like the books that you've done and I like it because you have traveled the world, and so you've seen the cultures, you've seen the history, and so you put us there is what it sounds like in your books. Like we're part of this this action. It doesn't take place in one place too. I like it that you mentioned Japan or India or Russia or Norway, so if you like globe-trotting, ladies and gentlemen, these are the books for you right now.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bob. Thank you.
Let me bring up your website really quick, and then we'll talk about that really quick. Let me bring this up for our audience here. So, ladies and gentlemen, Humphrey has his own website, and it's very simple. Just www.humphreyhawksley.com. So, Humphrey, tell our audience if they was to go to your website, what all would they see there? What could they browse through?
They'll see the two. They'll see Ice Islands at the top, and they'll see Asian Waters, which was my latest nonfiction. They got my ugly face and a little bit about me and things. And then there are the different sections. So we've got the Reiko Zena series, which is the one we've just been discussing.
Sure.
And then the Future History series that we went into, which was Dragonfire and Dragon Strike in the Third World War. And they've got some of the standalones I did in the interim of those. And then there's a journalism page because I still write stuff, and we put that up as and when it comes out. And then the one that I'm building on and I'm trying to do, there's a thing called Humphrey's Diary. And twice a week with a co-host, I do a show like yours, Bob.
Interesting.
We bring on authors, and if they've got a good, a book out, and they can be a non-fiction author or a fiction author, or it's a big issue book, we're just finishing an Agatha Christie themed month at the moment.
I've been in a couple of Agatha Christie's plays when I was an actor a long time ago.
Really?
I was
Were you in the Mousetrap?
I was in Mousetrap, and I was in Ten Little Indians. Small world, isn't it?
That's brilliant. But so that's together with your brilliant painting of kangaroos, part of your skill set, is it?
Yeah. Brief history. I was a DJ for a while. Then I went from DJ to actor, and then I went from actor to webcast host. So I guess I don't know what the next step is. Would it be BBC?
I don't know. It's Van Buren variety, isn't it? So
yeah, that's true. Is there a way they can contact you on your website if they want to send you an email or a message?
Yeah, it's very easy. It's hh@humphreyhawksley.com. I mean, there is a sort of contact thing, and there's a newsletter thing to sign up to, which I'm not very good at. Are you good at that? I do. It's
iffy. Yeah.
And there's a blog, but I'm finding that I just put stuff up on Facebook or something now because I've got a Humphrey Hawksley Books Facebook page.
Okay,
so I tend not to do the blog. So I don't know. All of these things are a mystery. You have to get them right. And so they can read. They've got all the reviews. We'll put your show will be up there.
Thank you.
Then that'll be on Twitter and Facebook and everything like that. In about a week's time. And we try to keep it very interactive. And one thing that I do say is that anybody sends me an email, they will get a reply. And they might get an automated one to begin with, but they will get a reply within a week or within a minute, depending where we are.
That works. That's perfect. Now, you mentioned your show earlier that y'all have this book talk, kind of like my show. So do y'all do the show live? Or when would y'all do the show? When could we, if we want to tune in, what would we do? Or do we just watch the recording after?
Well, it's a little bit exactly what you said. It is 7:00 in the morning Eastern. So that's 6:00 in the morning Central.
Texas time.
Where you are. So maybe only for insomniacs. But we do it there's a Tuesday show, Tuesday, Thursday and Friday show, and on my diary is the ones that I'm doing, and also there's an archive there that I've nicked from the company, so if they go to the archive they can see all of the shows. So if I had you on, it would be you and me chatting for an hour and that.
I'd love to tune in. Yeah, I'll have to set my clock a little bit earlier in the morning and maybe call my boss. Hey, I'm going to be a little bit late today.
And then there's tomorrow I've got two shows tomorrow. I've got the Goldster Book Club show. And I also do host a monthly democracy forum debate. And it's
that's interesting.
It's for it's a magazine and a debating thing, and we're doing China and Afghanistan tomorrow. China's role in Afghanistan. So we get a panel of experts on, 4 or 5 experts, and we talk for 2 hours on topics. So we do all sorts of topics. Yeah.
I'm sure that 2 hours is still not long enough for everything y'all want to talk about.
No, you're always running out of time.
Well, I would like to talk about before we leave. There's some, ladies and gentlemen, I have not even scratched the surface of what this man has done. Let me just, I'd like to cover ones that I thought were interesting as well. This one's called Asian Waters. I don't think we talked about that one, have we?
No.
Is this a standalone or is this also a series?
This is my latest non-fiction book.
Non-fiction.
Latest, and this is the revised and expanded version. So the first edition came out, I think, 2018. This came out 2020, practically rewritten because that was the Trump era.
And, sure.
And a lot of stuff changed. But this is I wrote it as a primer. So anybody who's interested in Asia or wants to travel to Asia, you pick it up and you can look at it and you can see how, where does Pakistan and China, how does that all work? They've got a big alliance, but how does the history of that work? Who are the players now? Mm-hmm. Why is the Philippines so important? Where are the democracies? How come you've got here 20 countries all working together, but they don't have a shared political values. You've got a Buddhist state next to a authoritarian state, next
communist
to a military
state. Yeah, uh-huh.
and they all get on together.
They do.
In a way, it's not, not in a huge way. So it's sort of if you've got a plane ride or you want to know about Asia, you dip into that because it is footnoted, it is accurate, but it just tells you how did America get the Philippines? By mistake,
right?
because it won the Spanish War over in Cuba.
That's
so
it.
there's all of this stuff in there.
Never know how history is going to
you never know. Yeah, but it ends just to say on this Taiwan issue that we on this sort of Third World War type of thing, and actually I say that because I'm a naive journalist in a way. I say, okay, so I list the peace conferences that have taken place after war has broken out. So you have
after the fact,
Vienna, United Nations, and all the rest of it. And I say, for just once, can we have a peace conference before the war starts?
Yeah, like I said, diplomacy.
Yeah, diplomacy. I don't know if that's going to happen.
Well, I want to share some nice comments that we've been getting from our live audience. Just Chad said this guy is very interesting.
Thank you, Chad.
And then Sandra says, thank you, Humphrey, for coming on Van Buren Variety and sharing your adventures and books.
Thank you, Sandra. Drop me a note, or I'll drop you a note, and we can continue the discussion.
Absolutely. You can leave a comment in after the episode is over, ladies and gentlemen. And again, you can contact Humphrey yourself going to his website. That's www.humphreyhawksley.com. And ladies and gentlemen, this 1 hour, does not do him justice. He's got so many adventures. And so, Humphrey, I would love for you to come back on the show to talk more about your books and about your world adventures. I said before the show, ladies and gentlemen, he puts my map to shame because I've only done this small part. He's been from here to here to here to here. So I like a world traveler. Well, Humphrey, I appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, thank you. What time are you now?
We are out where I'm at is 8 p.m. Central, and it is 2 a.m. in Britain right now. So
my thing's just gone to 2 a.m. But it's been great. It's gone very. Thank you for your questions that really sort of prompted me to think about about all of the books and everything. Thank you.
Absolutely. And ladies and gentlemen, like I said, if you want more information, he's got a lot more books that he's written on his website that we didn't cover. So I strongly recommend you go to www.humphreyhawksley.com. And you know what? a lot of other authors have said this, and you'll probably agree, Humphrey. I'm telling my audience this. If you read one of his books one or more of his books, and you really like it, leave a review. Authors really love to hear reviews. Would that be a correct statement, Humphrey?
Yeah, that's the correct. And also, Bob, the reviews on Goodreads and Amazon do a lot more to sell books now than even a review in the New York Times.
Okay.
They really do. They kick algorithms and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Now, I'll put your website up here, but you brought up a good point. If people are watching this and are very interested in buying your books, where would you suggest they go? This website here, or are there other places they can go to buy your books?
I would suggest go to the website, and they have the Amazon links on the website.
Good.
But if you're in a community, go to your local bookstore, order it in from there. It might be a little bit more expensive. It might take a couple more days to get there, but keep those books, or go to your library, order it from your library. And they have to get it in, they'll give it to you. Yep.
Good advice.
Yeah.
Well, Humphrey, I'm very honored you were on the show tonight. You've got so many stories, and we'd love to hear back from you again.
I'll look forward to that. We'll make a date.
Thanks soon. Yeah. Thank you, Humphrey. Have a good night.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.
And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for tonight's episode of the Van Buren Variety Show. Just a reminder, I am on this show. I do one show a week. Now, normally I do these every Tuesday night. You'll notice that tonight was a Wednesday night. I had another commitment that I had to do, so that's why this show got moved one night forward to Wednesday. But normally it's every Tuesday night, and I always have a very interesting guest to talk about an equally interesting topic. You never know what it's going to be. So again, I encourage you to hit that subscribe button. That's Van Buren Variety, Van Buren Variety. Make sure you subscribe. And if you like Humphrey's episode tonight, make sure you hit that like button and make some comments too. I'm sure he would love to hear it. And most importantly, if you're really intrigued by his books, go and buy it. If you like super adventure like I do, you won't want to miss this series. And there's a lot more that he's done that you'll find on his website as well. So that's going to do it for me tonight. This is Bob Van Buren for the Van Buren Variety Show. I hope you all have a great evening. Good night, everybody.